Welcome back to From Dark to Light, the podcast where we shine a light on stories of resilience, courage, and transformation. I'm your host, Julie Crawford. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to someone whose story is both deeply personal and universally powerful. Mai was born in a refugee camp in Thailand, grew up navigating two cultures, and faced patriarchal expectations that shaped and at times limited her early life. A profound miscommunication at just 14 years old altered her path. Yet her strength and determination carried her toward a future she once only dreamt of. Today, Mai is a mentor, an advocate, a mother, and a voice for young Hmong women. Her story is about communication, cultural identity, healing, and the incredible power of believing in yourself. Let's step into her journey from dark to light. Hello, Mai. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to have your story be shared because I think that it's going to help people understand how silence and cultural expectations help shape young people's lives, and then also how courage and honesty can reshape it. You have a pretty interesting story, and I would love for you to be able to share it with us. But first, can you share a little bit about what life is like now for you?
Yes, life is good to sum it up. I've worked so hard to achieve everything that I have right now, and I'm at that point where I can say that I have everything that I've dreamed of. So, right now I'm married. I have 3 kids who are 12, 14, and 28. And they're all doing well. And I'm just very happy that, I have my own home. I have my home life the way I want it.
Yeah.
My career is in a really good spot. And so I can say that I'm living the life I've always dreamed of.
That is amazing. It gives me goosebumps to hear that, because let's go back to, you were born in a refugee camp. To think about that and where you're at now is pretty incredible. And I hope you can understand how incredible that is as well, for you to say that you love your life the way it is. But can you take us back to what you remember of those days? Do you remember anything? Because you're born in a refugee camp, right? And you were there for several years.
Mhm.
Yeah, can you share that?
That's right. Yeah, so let me just back up a little bit about how we got there in the first place.
Yeah.
So my cultural background is I'm Hmong, and my parents were living in Laos at the same time the Vietnam War was happening. If you know anything about Hmong history, the Hmong people were recruited to help the CIA fight the communists in Laos. And so my, dad and uncles and, grandpas did that. But after the communists won the Vietnam War, the Hmong people were being persecuted for that exact same reason. And
Wow.
so my parents, along with thousands of other Hmong people, had to flee Laos for their own safety. So my parents ran through the jungles of Laos for 14 days before they got to the Mekong River, and then they had to swim across this wide river to get to Thailand. And in Thailand is where the refugee camps were set up. And so my parents did that along with my baby brother and extended family members. And they ended up in the Ban Vinai refugee camp, which is where I was born. So my parents actually lived there from 1975 to 1987.
Wow.
So it was a long time. I was born in 82. And so I lived there for 5 years before we came to the US. And, I do have little snippets of memories from the refugee camp, but they were all, happy, good memories. Like I was with my mom and dad. I had a little brother and sister. I had my relatives and, my grandmas around me. And so I was just like a normal child growing up. I didn't feel the restrictions of a refugee camp. To me, it was just childhood.
Wow. Did you ever talk to your parents about their time there? I mean, they were there for 12 years, or around 12 years. What was their experience like? Because I think in my head and a lot of others, when you think of refugee camps, because we've seen them on the news nowadays, they're really awful and difficult to live in. Did they share their experience at all?
No, they have not shared much of their experience, and I've always hesitated to ask because I don't want to bring up that trauma. I
Hmm.
know, both my parents were never diagnosed with PTSD. They never sought mental health counseling, but I know that they had
Right.
PTSD from the war and from living in the refugee camp. The only
Hmm.
things they really shared with us were every now and then, if we were to watch a movie on war, it'll trigger a memory and then they'll tell us about something similar that happened to them. But otherwise, we've never sat down to get a full history of it. I
Hmm.
think as kids have been afraid to ask because we don't want to open those wounds because it was
Yeah.
a very painful time for them. And
Yeah.
so we just allow them to share whenever they felt comfortable. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of stories from them about their experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is understandable for sure. So tell us how you ended up coming to America. And uh, I have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, so we came to America when I was 5 years old. There were three of us kids, five, three, and one. And when we first came here, we came to Minnesota right away, and we lived with my dad's sister and her family for a little bit before we got our own apartment. I grew up in St. Paul, went to St. Paul elementary, junior high, and high school. And so to me, I think I had a pretty normal or um, you know, eldest daughter Hmong immigrant life. And when I say normal, I mean, since I was the oldest and the first to learn English, I interpreted for my parents at conferences,
Mhm.
sometimes at doctor's appointments. I didn't really know what I was saying, but, I knew English better than my parents. So I did that. I read all their mail for them.
Yeah.
And so in America, I became almost more of the adult and kind of the bridge between my parents, the home culture, and the American culture.
And that's what I was going to ask you about is what does it look like for the oldest child of 9 being the translator? You're saying that it's kind of like being an adult, but what other responsibilities are on you? Because I have dealt with that. I volunteered with a family from Afghanistan for many years. And as the girls learned English, there were 4 girls, and the mother didn't speak any, or the father was learning. It was amazing to see how fast they learned, also how much responsibility was on them. But can you share what that's like? I mean, you were the oldest of 9. Um, wow, what kind of
Mhm.
responsibilities did you
Correct.
have?
Correct. Yeah. So, in addition to interpreting and reading the mail for my parents, since I was the oldest, I had to learn how to bridge two cultures, right? In school, we spoke English, and then at home, we spoke mostly Hmong. And
Hmm.
so I had to learn when it was the right time to act like an American girl and when it was the right time to act like a Hmong girl.
Mm.
My upbringing, I want to say, even though I learned responsibility very early on, to me that was very natural. I changed my first diaper when I was in third grade because I had so many siblings,
Hmm.
and I don't think my childhood was hard. I thought those were just my contributions to the family. I knew English the best, and
Yeah.
so I translated and interpreted for my parents when I could.
Hmm.
Sometimes I was very embarrassed to do so, but it was just part of my responsibility. I never thought that it was weird or
Yeah.
difficult or challenging. It was just what I had to do as my role
Yeah.
as the oldest person in the family.
Did you have other Hmong girls around you, though, where you were kind of seeing what they were doing and you were all doing very similar things? Or did you feel at any point like, oh, well, my friends are doing, they just get to go home and play video games, after school, and I have to help take care of siblings? Like, what was your surroundings like?
Yeah, even though we lived in St. Paul all throughout elementary school, I actually never had a lot of Hmong people or Hmong girls in my classes.
Hmm.
So I didn't really have a Hmong best friend until I was in sixth grade. I had a Caucasian and Hispanic best friends in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, and they lived in my neighborhood. And my parents allowed me to go to their houses to
Hmm.
hang out, and they came over to my house every now and then. So, um, I never felt like I wasn't allowed to have a social life because I was a
Wow.
Hmong girl.
Oh, that's great.
And actually, I actually loved schooled and loved to read. And so I spent most of my time reading anyway. I never wanted to go out anyway. In elementary school, I didn't have to rebel much, and say, I want to go to my friend's house. Why can't I go? Because I always wanted to stay home and just read.
Wow. Wow. So, those that are unfamiliar with the Hmong culture, what are some things that you think people should understand about the culture?
Yeah, so the culture is very patriarchal. Everything is done through the father's lineage. The Hmong have 18 last names. They're called clans. And so if you ever hear of the 18 Hmong council or 18 clans, it's because the Hmong people have 18 last names.
Hmm.
And so your dad's clan, your last name, is the clan that you belong to. And it is a very patriarchal society. So boys are valued over girls traditionally.
Mhm.
And so boys get better treatment, or they may get the choice of having, back in Laos, the choice of having an education, whereas girls can't. They
Mhm.
need to stay home and learn how to cook and clean and learn how to be a good wife. In America, our parents are really trying to balance the Hmong culture and what they could carry over
Mhm.
to American cultural norms. But there was still a lot of butting heads because the two cultures are so different that my parents were still very traditional.
Right.
But fortunately, even though my parents were still very traditional, I always knew that my parents loved me.
Mm.
And my parents always encouraged all of us boys and girls to go to school, get an education. They didn't want us to suffer. And so they told us education was the way out of poverty. And we all needed to go to school. We all needed to go to college so that
Oh,
we could get good jobs and be self sufficient.
yeah. So, where did they get that from if really the patriarchal norms were very much male dominated? Where did they get that understanding that even the females needed to go and work? Because if traditionally you're like, no, you stay home, you take care of the kids and be a good wife, like that's pretty amazing. And was that a lot different than maybe their friends or relatives?
I have no idea where they got that from, where girls could be treated equally or almost as equally as boys can. But I know that not all parents have that mindset. And so
Mhm.
thankfully, I don't, for whatever reason, my parents had a mindset that we all needed education. There are some girls out there who I know their parents didn't encourage college after high school.
Mhm.
Their main goal in life was to learn how to be a good wife and a good mother.
Were there any unspoken rules about expectations placed on girls versus boys in your household?
In my household, not really.
Hmm.
Since I was the oldest child, I helped take care of the younger kids. And it came to me very naturally. Of course, my parents asked me for help, and I was
Hmm.
the good, obedient daughter. I never, talked back to my parents, never
Yeah.
argued with them. I made bottles for my siblings. I learned how to change, poopy diapers. And so that was my thing. And then a younger sister, who's 4 years younger than me, she loved to cook and clean. And so she followed my mom around the kitchen all the time. And so that's why now I feel like I'm the favorite auntie with all the nieces and nephews because I know how to take care of kids. And then my sister, she's the best cook in the family because she followed my mom around,
Oh,
And then in between
yeah.
us, we had a brother. And, now that you've asked that question and I think back to it, I'm sure at some point he made bottles for the kids too. I don't know if he ever changed a dirty diaper. So I'm going to have to think about that one. I've never thought about our roles or our chores we had as when we were kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so let's fast forward. So it seems like you had a pretty great childhood in regards to um, life in America. And even though you had a lot of responsibilities, it seemed like there was a good balance there and a lot of love. Let's talk about when you were a teenager, because I know that you have shared that you did get married at 14 years old. And I would just love for you to share how that happened. And we'll start there.
Yes. Yeah, so I did get married when I was 14 years old. And whenever I tell people that, the first question they ask, what is legally? And I say no. It was a cultural marriage,
Mhm.
not legal, but in, all aspects of the home culture, it was like I guess well received or accepted. And then the second question people usually ask is, was it an arranged marriage? And I said no, it wasn't.
Mhm.
So I was 14 years old, dating my boyfriend. I think we were dating for 2 or 3, maybe 4 months. He came over to visit one day, and we were hanging out in my bedroom chatting, which I've since learned that's a big no-no. A girl and and boy cannot be alone in a room together.
Mhm.
But I was 14. I didn't know that. My
Yeah.
parents hadn't really had like the birds and the bees talk with me, right? Because I didn't really have this. I wasn't boy crazy, when
Yeah.
I was that age. And so my parents never had that conversation with me. So we were just hanging out in my bedroom talking. And then my parents weren't home at the time. And then when they came home, they saw somebody's shoes by the front door because most people don't wear shoes in the house.
Uh-huh.
And so my parents suspected something. They came knocking on my bedroom door. And, I was like, Mom, I'm going to sleep. Don't bother me. And she said, No, I just need to get something in your room. And I said, No, Mom, I'm sleeping. Don't bother me. Whatever you need to get, you can get it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And so my parents suspected it. And
Sure.
so eventually I did open the door. My parents saw my boyfriend in there, and they were just livid, right? That I was alone in the bedroom with a
Mhm.
boy, and what were we doing there alone with the door closed?
Right.
And so they chased him out of the house. And then, because my parents are very traditional, and they didn't know how to handle this, the next day my dad called 3 of my uncles to come talk to me. And so here I am, this 14-year-old girl who's been crying all night in her room.
Mhm.
Early the next morning, 3 of my uncles come into my bedroom and ask me, why was he in your room? Did you have sex? And I said, no, we were just talking, we didn't have sex. And they kept, threatening me. Well, what if we take you to the doctor? And they said that
Mhm.
you did have sex. What are you going to say then? And I said, you know what? Go ahead. Take me to the doctor. We did have sex. I don't know why you don't believe me.
Mhm.
Because in our culture, if you have sex with someone, you have to marry them. And
Okay.
so I said, no, we didn't have sex. If you don't believe me, then take me to the doctor.
Mhm.
And so, I was in that moment, I was very intimidated. I was very angry at my uncles, and especially more angry at my parents to wonder why they would call my 3 uncles to come lecture me and talk
Mhm.
to me about this. Why couldn't my parents and I have just communicated about this? But that's not
Yeah.
how it works in our culture.
Yeah.
The uncles are called in for every family disagreement or a problem that there is to
Really?
help mediate.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it
the clan system is very communal.
Oh, okay. So in that moment, your parents are in the home, your uncles are talking to you, asking you all these
Mhm.
questions. What are your parents doing? They're just
They're not in the room. They are downstairs in the living room or in their kitchen. They're not a part of this conversation. So it was just 3 of my uncles
wow.
who, like I know they're my uncles. I'm not especially close to them. I see them all the time at events, but
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, this is my favorite uncle or anything. And
Yeah.
so I was just so angry that my parents put me in that situation.
Yeah. So and I can imagine for a 14-year-old, and especially because I know we've discussed how you guys didn't really communicate, share feelings, or have this conversation about sex or anything like that. So you probably had to have been, if you, especially if you're sheltered at all, or at least like emotionally not sharing those things, then all of a sudden these adults are coming to you with this information. It had to have been so difficult at your age to understand what it all meant. What was the next step? Like they leave and then what happens?
Mhm. Yeah, so this actually all happened when I was in 8th grade over spring break. And, I just turned 14. And so after they left, I was waiting for them to take me to the doctor whenever that came up, right?
Yeah.
And so my boyfriend and I were still sneaking, talking on the phone. And I was so mad at my parents that they brought their relatives into this situation. I thought that my parents hated me and wanted to get rid of me. Otherwise, why would they bring their relatives in? And while my boyfriend and I were talking, I knew that he and his parents had talked about marriage before, just marriage in general for him, even though he was only 2 years older than me.
Mhm.
His parents had entertained the idea before. And so then he asked me, do you just want to get married? And I was so mad at my parents and everything. I just said yes. And so
Mhm.
then I, packed an extra pair of clothes, got on the city bus and took the city bus to his house and we got married.
Wow. Wow. What a drastic thing to do at such a vulnerable age. And I know you have daughters, and anyone who makes a decision at 13, 14, it's not going to be a logical decision most of the time because there's so much going on at that time in life. And then to compact this cultural aspect of maybe feeling shameful for something you didn't even do and being blamed for it. That's a lot of weight for a young girl. So you decide you're just going to get married because you felt like that was the only way out, or for them to understand or accept you? What did you think that was going to solve?
I thought that since my parents made this into such a big deal that they hated me, they wanted to get rid of me. And as a 14-year-old, I just thought, well, if you hate me so much, I'll just leave. I'll just leave your house. I'll
Mhm.
just go get married. And so I thought I was, maybe getting rid of a problem for my parents. It wasn't until years later that my brother made a comment to me about, mom and dad only let you get married so that you wouldn't run away together. And I said, what? I didn't know that. I got married because I thought mom and dad wanted me to. And so I know that back in Laos, if a boy and a girl wanted to get married, and there were teenagers who got married, it was acceptable back then.
Mhm.
If a boy and a girl wanted to get married and they weren't allowed to, they may run away together or they may commit suicide together. And so I now wonder, if that's what was going through my parents'
Mhm.
heads. They probably thought that we loved each other so much. If we didn't get married, we would do something to ourselves. And that's why they allowed us to get married,
Yeah.
which wasn't the case at all from my perspective.
Yeah, but after this happens, you actually never had a conversation with your parents to say exactly how you were feeling. Well, if you want me to just get married, I'll get married, or if you want me out, you never had that like argument or discussion with them. You just decided to get married.
Correct. Correct.
Wow.
In our culture, we don't talk about feelings.
Yeah.
And so it never came up. I'm in my 40s now. We've never still talked about it.
Wow. So if your family had been able to communicate differently, what might have changed for you at 14?
I think if I knew how to communicate better with my parents at that time, I would have asked them, why did you call the uncles to come talk to me?
Mhm.
I would have told my parents my hopes and dreams. Ever since I was in elementary school, I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I didn't want to be a teen mom or a teen bride and a teen mom because I've seen those relationships.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that for myself. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to get a good job. I wanted to buy a house. Those are all things that I wanted, but I never told my parents that.
Mhm.
And I think that if we had been better communicators, if our relationship was more open, I would have said, Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what I did to upset you.
Mhm.
I didn't know that having a boy in my bedroom was not allowed, but
Yeah.
I won't do it again.
Yeah.
I don't want to get married.
Yeah. So, such a simple thing as a conversation was not simple in your culture. Was it because you were afraid of them at that point? Was there a fear, or was that because of you didn't want to like rock the apple cart at all? What would be that reason that you wouldn't go to your parents?
I don't think I feared my parents. I don't think I ever feared them, but it's just that line of communication wasn't there. It was
Mhm.
never there,
Mhm.
because that was the cultural norm.
Yeah.
Like we never said I love you growing up. We never hugged growing
Hmm.
up. I always knew my parents loved me though, because
Hmm.
my mom would ask me what I wanted to eat on my birthday so she could cook it, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing. I think of other kids or other people who are going through stuff and they haven't been modeled how to communicate. So then they don't know how, and you can see how things can come of it, right? Negative things or decisions that would impact their life because they don't have a role model or an adult to communicate that to. So, which I know you've gone on to help model for other young girls, but we'll get to that. So, okay, so you get married at 14. You move in because in the Hmong culture, you shared with me that you move in with the husband's family. And then what was life like for you there?
Yes. So I moved in with my husband's family. And, I think nobody ever realizes how good their parents are until they have in laws. And so, because you tend to think that everybody else, all other parents are like your parents, or maybe
Mm,
your parents are the worst of all the parents.
mm.
And so it was a rude awakening for me to go live with another family, see how they lived, see the dynamics of their relationship. It
Mhm.
was just so different from the household that I grew up in. Like, one example, my mom and dad always cooked together,
Oh.
even though women are supposed to cook and clean. My parents cooked every meal together. And in my new home life, my father in law didn't cook at all, not once. My mother in law cooked for him and then cleaned. And so that was just a very weird dynamic to me.
Mhm.
And at one point, my mother in law bragged that her husband had never changed a diaper. And to me, I was just like, how is that even possible? When you have 6 or 7 kids. And
Wow.
so it was a very different dynamic than what I grew up with.
Yeah. And then do those same household norms, do you think that they are pushed down on you now as the new wife? Like, that's how you're going to run your household? Is that
Yeah,
what the expectation is?
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. The expectation in the home culture is that you are supposed to learn what your mother in law likes and you do things the way she wants them.
Mm, hmm. Okay. So you're living there and then you end up getting pregnant, like a lot of brides, young brides. What is that like for you?
Mhm.
And were you shocked? How were you feeling then at 15? Or were you
Yeah.
still
So, yeah,
14?
6 months after I got married, I got pregnant. I was still 14 when I
Yeah,
got pregnant, because I just turned 15 when I got married.
right.
And so I got pregnant. And, I've talked about this to my daughter before. I did end up having a daughter, but at that time, as I said, I knew two women who were teenagers who got married and had kids, and they both dropped out of school and they are both not doing well. And
Mm,
I knew I didn't want that for myself, even though I
yeah.
had gotten married. I didn't want to drop out of school. And so I thought that if I had a child, I would 100% had to drop out of school. And so,
Mm,
we considered abortion, and my in-laws wanted us to have an abortion. And I told my parents, and my mom said, absolutely no way. She said,
mm,
no way, you're not going to have an abortion. Do you know how hard it is to get pregnant? Because my mom had lost 2 children before me, 2 infants. And she also suffered at least 2 miscarriages, probably more
mm.
miscarriages in the refugee camp.
Wow.
And she said, you are not going to have an abortion. You are
Mhm,
going to have this child. It will help you raise this child. And I
mm.
did. And that was the best decision I've ever made.
Wow.
I'm so glad that I had my daughter because she was the light of my life at that time.
Yeah. Wow. So your mom came through for you and that's such a huge, huge thing because you had that support system. So you ended up being able to stay in school and your mom watched the baby all through the years of you finishing school?
So no, so we continue to live with my in-laws. So I was married for 4 years. We continue to live with my in-laws, and it was very challenging. while I was still, so I had my daughter the summer before 10th grade. And
Mm,
so I didn't miss any school. I went to 10th grade. At that time, my husband dropped out of school already.
mm,
And so he was watching her during the day while I was at school. And then he worked second or third shift. So we made it work so that I didn't have to miss school. And there was a point when it was very stressful or just the timing didn't work. And so my daughter did live with my parents for a couple of months. And
mhm.
so that he could work and so I could go to school. So
Yeah.
my parents were very helpful throughout the whole time.
Wow. It's almost like they always threw you a lifeline, which is pretty wonderful. So I can't even imagine. I mean, my own mother had a child very young, and ended up dropping out of school because she was expected to, and similar thing. Um, and I actually recently found out that my parents' marriage was arranged, which at 40 something years old, I'm like, oh, really? Like for some reason, it's very interesting in my brain. I'm still processing this, but so you have a baby at 15, and uh, you continue no matter what. You're like, I am going to get an education. That seems to have been a non-negotiable for you,
Yes.
which is pretty
Uh-huh.
incredible. And so you decide things are not that great at home, and you decide you're going to leave the marriage, right? Can you tell us how you got the strength to be able to do that at 18?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were married for 4 years. Things were good for maybe the first couple of months. And then, he became verbally abusive, emotionally abusive. And after I had my daughter, I had this kind of light bulb go off that I don't want my daughter to grow up in this environment.
Hmm.
And so, but I still stayed with him. And I remember it was after I graduated high school already. It was Labor Day weekend that year. So a couple months after graduation, we got into an argument. He slapped me, and I thought to myself, you know what? Of every, I already have to put up with so much stuff. I am
Hmm.
not going to put up with physical violence too.
Yeah.
And so I actually ended up calling the police, and they came and took my daughter and I to my friend's house. At the time, we were actually living in a small town about 45 minutes away from the Twin Cities. And
Hmm.
so I couldn't ask the police to take me to my parents' house 45 minutes. And throughout this whole time, I've thought about the cultural implications of what would happen, with each decision I made. So even when the police officer came and I explained to her what happened, and then my daughter and I just needed to get out of that house. I had two Hmong friends who lived nearby. But in our culture, if I would have told the police officer to take me to their houses, the Hmong clan system would have accused my friends of breaking up our marriage. They would have accused my friends
Really?
of, telling me to leave my husband. So I knew I couldn't go to my Hmong friends' houses.
Wow.
And I had a really good Hispanic friend. So I asked a police officer to take my daughter and I there.
Hmm.
And so we ended up at her house, spent the night with her because I think it was later in the day already. Spent the night with her. She had a nanny job. So the next day, she took my daughter and me to her nanny job. And then after that, she dropped us off at my parents' house. And I will always be grateful for her for helping me out at that
Wow.
time.
Wow. And your parents, you say how you guys didn't say you love each other and hug and all of that kind of stuff, but you always knew they loved you so much. And it proves it that they say, come in, come live with us. We will take care of you. And can you share that and how much love you felt then?
Yeah. Yes. So I was actually very afraid to become a divorced woman in our culture. If you are divorced, it means you did something wrong. The woman did something wrong. It's never really it's never the guy's fault, right?
Yeah.
It's like if he hits you, then you must have said something to upset him. If
Mhm.
he cheats on you, then you must have done something wrong in the marriage for him to cheat on you. And
Yeah.
so I've seen teenage brides go through this cycle where they were in very violent relationships, and their own parents said, you can't leave your husband. Don't embarrass us. Don't shame us by getting a divorce. And so I was afraid that my parents would say the same thing to me. So I was very scared when my friend dropped us off at my parents' house. But my parents were, I think, just relieved to see us, relieved to see that we were okay. And they said, come back and live with us. We'll help you take care of your daughter and you can go to college. And
Wow.
so, during the whole time that I lived with my parents, they never said anything disparaging to me. They never made any remarks about my worth or my value because I was now a divorced woman. And so I think that really empowered me to start living the life that I wanted because my parents were there to support me the best way they knew how.
That is just wonderful. We discussed this when we first met. So many women who want to leave don't leave. Not only generally because they don't have the money to leave, but they don't have the fam or the support to leave. And you did, which is just remarkable. But you weren't even sure that you necessarily had it, right? Like you didn't want to bring shame to the
Mhm.
family
Correct.
or whatever. Anyone who's going through something like this that knows that they are not in a situation that they should be in, what kind of advice would you give to them to be able to take that step, regardless of if they have support or not?
I would say, know the kind of life that you want to live or the kind of life you dream of. Even if you don't think you can ever attain it, just do it. Just reach for it. I often, there's so much judgment for others that throughout the years I've always told myself, if I can sleep peacefully at night with the decisions I've made for the day, then I know I've made the right decision. So even though if others may judge me for getting a divorce, I know at the end of the day, I'm in a much better space. I'm okay with other people judging me. So
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, do whatever it is that your heart tells you to do despite other people's judgments and live the life that you want or live the life you dream of. I mean,
Mm.
as I said at the beginning of this, I'm living the life I always dreamed of. I didn't know that I could be here when I was 18 years old, when I was
Yeah.
in that car ride to my parents' house.
Yeah. Wow. And so you go on to get your bachelor's degree, right? And then even go on to get your master's
Yes.
degree later on. Tell us about that. I mean, that's just remarkable. How were you able to do it all?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've said to people, I've been fighting the patriarchy all my life, right? So let me just share a little bit about some of the other fights I've had along
Yeah,
the way.
I'd love for you to.
So, I lived with my parents for about 3 years after my divorce, and what's worse than a divorced woman who lives on her own. And so, when I was 21, I told my parents I wanted to move out. I wanted to learn to be independent and get my own apartment for my daughter and me. And that was not allowed. And so my parents are like, no, you can't do that. Just live with us. If you want to, I mean, I wasn't paying rent to my parents at that time, but they said, if you want to pay rent, pay us rent.
Mhm,
But you can't live on your own. It's just not allowed for a divorced woman and a single mom to live on her own.
mhm.
And I said, but I really want to. And so, and I actually waited until I put a deposit down in an apartment to tell my parents. And my parents said, how much is the deposit? Nope, cancel it. We'll give you back that money ourselves, even if you can't get it back.
Wow.
My parents even enlisted an aunt and uncle to tell me not to move out. And I said, Mom, I really want to move out on my own. Like, I need to
Mhm.
do this. And so it took a couple weeks, but then my mom finally bought me a set of pots and pans for the apartment. So she accepted it. And so, yeah, so like that was another huge win in my books for my
Mm.
parents to allow me to go live on my own.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I've had these, battles kind of like through like that throughout my 20s.
Mhm.
Still always fighting the traditional norms.
Yeah. Wow. How was your dad in this? Because I know it's like a patriarchal type of culture, but what was your dad saying? Was he expressing things more so than mom?
So again, in our family, we don't talk, right? So we don't express our feelings or anything. But I think my dad is a closet feminist.
Eh,
I think my dad really stood up for me. If any of my relatives asked, like, why is she divorced? Like, he protected me. He said, because her husband wasn't a good man, and that's why she's divorced. Like, he never blamed anything on me. If anybody said anything bad about me, my parents sheltered me from it. I never heard any relatives or anybody say anything
wow.
bad about me. And
Yeah.
so I think in his own way, my dad really protected me and protected my reputation.
Yeah. Wow. So, know that I just skipped over. I was like, oh, you got a bachelor's and master's, but I know it wasn't that simple. I mean, especially as a single
Yeah.
mom. And can you kind of give
Yes.
us a little bit of how that happened?
Sure. Yeah. And so I started dating my now husband. He's also Hmong. He's very supportive. And when we met, I told him, my top priorities in my life are my daughter, my job, and my education. So if you can deal with that, then we can date. If you can't, then
Yeah.
let me know right now. And
Yeah.
he was like, sure, that's fine. And so we dated for a long time. And, I was working full time and going to school at nights for most of my 20s. I didn't graduate with my bachelor's degree until I was 26 because I was going part time at
Yeah.
night while working full time. And so I actually bought a house when I was 25. And here's another patriarchal case study. When I was ready to buy my house, I told my parents that I was going to buy a house, and my boyfriend, who's now my husband, was going to move in with me and will pay for half the rent. And my parents said that's not allowed. And
Uh-huh.
I said, but I really want to buy a house now. Like, I want to make this next step. And, it's so expensive. He'll just move in with me because we've been already dating for 4 years. He'll move in with me and we'll split the bills. And my dad said, are you sure he's actually going to pay the bills? And I said, yeah, he said he would. So I trust him to. And then the kicker was I told my parents when I'd already,
Yeah.
knew which house I wanted to buy and I was ready to sign the paperwork. And I told my parents, and actually the house that I'm going to buy, the last owner, he died in the house.
Mm.
And so my parents pivoted immediately to, you can't buy a house where someone died. And they forgot about the whole boyfriend moving in thing. And they said, you can't buy a house. That's bad luck. You can buy a house that somebody passed away in. And I said, it's fine. Like, I'm not worried. And so they were so focused on that and the spiritual piece of
Yeah.
having someone die in the house. They completely forgot about my boyfriend moving in and never brought it up again. And so I ended up buying the house. And when I moved in, my mom swept the house of evil spirits. And so it was
Uh-huh.
fine. so, so my husband and I lived together for a couple more years. I've actually had 5-year plans since I was 19. After I
Oh,
left my ex-husband, I said I want to create and design my life exactly the way I want it to be.
yeah.
And so I've always had 5-year plans. So my plan was always to buy a house before getting married, which I did. My
Mhm.
plan was always to get my college degree before getting married, which I did. And, my husband, he was very supportive of me throughout the whole
Mhm.
process. He and my daughter got along very well. He would watch her so that I can do my homework. And so I'd say, my 20s were probably like the best time of my life. And because those are less stressful, right? Like,
Yeah.
I had a good job, I had a house, a supportive boyfriend, my
Mhm.
daughter was doing well. And so, yeah, I was very happy
Yeah.
in my 20s with how my life was going. And then after I graduated college, I was still like, I don't really want to get married yet. Let's wait a couple years.
Uh-huh.
So I waited 2 years and then we got married, had 2 more kids. And when I told him I wanted to go back to school to get my MBA, he was very supportive of it. And so
Wow.
we did it. We made it work.
Wow. Wow. So you've gone on to mentor other Hmong girls, and what themes do you see repeating across the generations, even now?
The thing that I still hear all the time is that Hmong girls say we don't have a voice. We don't have a voice in our community.
Mhm.
Hmong women are in such prominent positions now. They're leaders at work. their leaders in their, nonprofit organizations that they volunteer with. But when they go home, they still have to cook and clean. If they live with
Mm,
their in-laws, they still have to do things according to what their mother-in-law wants. And so, when there are big decisions being made, it's still the men who talk about what to do. And so women still say that I don't have a voice in my community. I may be a VP at work, but when I come
wow.
home, I have to put on my apron.
That's so interesting. So what do you tell these women or even maybe anyone who's maybe feels like unseen or pressured by cultural expectations? What do you say to them?
Yeah. So, one piece of advice that I got from a mentor that I now tell others is you can't control the clan system, but you can control what happens in your house. And so, change, talk to your husband about it, but change how things are done in your house. For example, when we have big events with our clans, the women are usually cooking and then they set the table and then the men eat first. And then the
Mhm.
women, once the men get up from the table, depending on the clan, once the men get up from the table, the women can then sit down and eat. Or as the men are eating at the formal table, the women are kind of scooping their food, in the kitchen and standing up and standing around and eating. And so I've never liked that. Ever since I was a little girl, I noticed that. I've never liked it. And so I told my husband, if when we host things at our house for the clan, we can't do that.
Right.
Even if the men and women aren't sitting together at the same table, two tables that need to be set up. And so the women and the men can eat together at the same time. I don't want to do the whole women eat last thing.
I had never heard of that, but it does show the patriarchy of that, right? And so your parents didn't model that though, right? They didn't do that in your household. I mean, I'm assuming that only because they made dinner together. Did you guys eat as a family together?
As a family, we eat together, but it's when you have big clan
Groups.
events. So it's when you host big clan events, they still abide by the traditional norms.
Wow. Wow. That is very interesting. Do you notice that when you do mentor other girls and stuff, that there are little micro changes that you are noticing among the Hmong population? Are girls speaking up more? Or is there better communication? Are you seeing any of the positive changes that you would hope for?
Yes, it's still slow, too slow for me,
Hmm.
but I think it is happening. I have a younger mentee who says she wants to be a clan leader. So in these clans, there's always a clan leader.
Hmm.
And of course, they've always been men. And she was like, I'm going to be a clan leader someday. And I'm like, yes, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. So as we wrap up here, what do you wish daughters knew about their mothers and grandmothers' silent experiences? Because it sounds like, there's generational, I don't want to say the word trauma, but it sounds like that might be a thing and experiences that aren't shared. So what do you wish that you knew or more about your mom and your grandparents or your grandmother?
Yeah. I wish that I would have asked them w- if they could do anything, what would they do? What are their wildest dreams
Hmm.
for themselves? And what are their wildest dreams for their kids and their grandkids? Because back in Laos, their roles were so limited to
Hmm.
cooking and cleaning, sewing, learning how to be a good wife and mother that they would have never imagined that we would come to the US and have leadership positions in a room full of men.
Right.
They could have never imagined it. So, I think a lot of the things I do, I say that I do it for my kids so they can have a better life. But I also do in honor of my mom and my grandmas, because they never had those opportunities. And I just think, if they were born here, if they had these opportunities, what would they have done with it? And so that's what
Right.
motivates me to strive and achieve as much as I can because they didn't have the opportunity and I did.
Yeah. Wow. What do you want the listeners to know and take away about your culture and the power of communication, what it's like to grow up Hmong?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are some things in the Hmong culture that are very beautiful. The clan system works for some people, it doesn't work for others. There is a lot of support when families are in need of something, the whole clan comes in to help.
Yeah.
But there are also still, I think, cultural norms that we need to remove, such as the sexism, the not being supportive of daughters that are in abusive marriages or want to leave their marriages. And so there's I think just like any culture, there are good cultural practices and there are bad cultural practices. And I hope that as the Hmong generation grow up here and learn more about what it's like to live your best life, that they are more supportive of Hmong girls and women.
So the last question I'll ask is, if there's one message you could give to girls who feel that their voice doesn't matter, what would it be?
I would say your voice does matter and your opinion of yourself is the most important. So be somebody that you can be proud of. Live your life the way you would be proud of.
Well, it sounds like you're very proud of yourself. I'm very proud of you. And I'm sure everyone who knows you can gain strength from your experience and in the role model you've been for your daughter. I mean, that's just, there's no price tag on that. That's for sure. So I'm really impressed by you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor to be here and share my story.
Here on From Dark to Light, we believe that resilience isn't about pretending the darkness never happened. It's about learning to rise from it and letting our scars tell a story of strength. If today's episode spoke to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need encouragement on their own path. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And as always, thank you for joining me in shining a light on the power of the human spirit. Until next time, I'm Julie Crawford, and this has been From Dark to Light.